So let's start with our questions. And the first one is kind of lightning round. And these things should help with those conversations we were talking about what we all have up in the top of our minds. So what 3 things keep you up at night? You want to start, Dave?
Sure. For me, the 3 things that keep me up at night: safety and security of our students and staff, hands down. 2, making sure all of our kids are well-rounded students from that social emotional perspective, and they've got the self-efficacy and confidence to grow and develop. And 3rd is ensuring our curriculum is relevant so that our teachers and our students are not only motivational and inspirational, but also aspirational to get our kids to dream beyond their current dreams.
I would ditto that. And then there's lots that keeps me up at night. So what I would say is inequities in education. And that does keep me up at night, and thinking about certain groups of students who are not given opportunities, and I think about bias within our schools, and so that keeps me up. Just some things that, the other thing I would say is that legislators who are making decisions for our schools, I think about oftentimes the people who are in government are not working with, but almost doing to. And so it sometimes impacts our professional learning and the time spent with students. So that keeps me up at night, definitely safety and security. And then the other thing is that, I just think that, we have to think about what's happening in society and how we're creating spaces for students. Watching the news this morning, thinking about the shooting that happened yesterday, and thinking about what are we going to do to make sure that we're creating a space for our students, and so to have conversations about that. So those are some things that keep me up. And I have a new neighbor, and she has 2 dogs that just keep me up at night too. It's something that's been really bothering me.
I have 2 dogs, and they keep me up at night all the time. So, double ditto all the things you guys have just said. Tacoma has 28,000 students. And so what keeps me up at night and keeps me awake is thinking about those 28,000 students, and are we doing everything we possibly can to close the achievement gap, and thinking in terms of our community and our partnerships. We have very strong community partnerships, and we can't do it alone. We have to have those partnerships to be able to move the needle for our students. And so I think about our stakeholders, our internal stakeholders, which would be those of you sitting in our room today with us, our librarians, as well as our teachers, our other staff members. Our principals are extremely important as well as our external stakeholders, our community members who want to support us and want to help, and how do we include them in the mix. So those are some of the things I think you guys have hit on. The safety and security is a big one, just because of the situation in our world today. Continually, I supervise our security department, and so I know the things that they deal with on a daily basis, and that definitely keeps me up at night. And the phone rings at night sometimes because of things that have happened in the district. So it's a lot of things that keep me awake at night. Those are just a few of them.
Good morning, everyone. I would say what keep me up, 3 things, certainly safety and security. There's a lot of things happening within the city of New York, and I am from Brooklyn, New York City. I think they have another. But that is by far one of the first things that keeps me up, because our children today are going through a lot of challenges and struggles, and one of the things I want to make sure that school leaders are reflective, responsive, on any missed opportunities where there are gaps that they had anything to play with that in terms of creating the right culture for their students. So that keeps me up at night a lot. And then how school leaders are developing their staff keeps me up at night, believe it or not, because a lot of times they overlook the needs of staff and all staff. And so that keeps me up at night, because I often hear about it, and again, I go right back to that principal and say, what was the lesson learned or the missed opportunity for this concern? And then the other thing I would say is advancing equity and making sure that we have the right programs and partners to meet the needs of all of our students and our schools. So those are the 3 things.
Michael, you mentioned a little bit about your community, and one thing I forgot in my little shuffling of paper was for you to describe that a little bit. Could you just mention like what your responsibilities are like for and for which types of communities?
Right. So I service great school leaders in school districts in Brooklyn, New York. I have 27 high schools, and I say that proudly because last year I had 48. So I love the fact that I have 27. About 40,000 students, believe it or not. I have some of the largest high schools still together that could have easily between 6,000 to 4,000 students, but also have schools where they are campus schools. So in a campus school, you can have 4 or 5 schools and still have about 3,000 students. And so those are some unique challenges, from the lowest end of socioeconomic to the highest end of socioeconomic statuses for families. I have them all, and very diverse ethnic groups, languages. I have it all. But I will say that I have the best and the brightest leaders, teachers, and students in Brooklyn. So I'm excited.
Okay. What's Tacoma like?
Tacoma is about 25 miles south of Seattle, Washington, and we have around, I said earlier, 28,000 students. We speak about 50 plus languages in our district. There's about 200,000 residents in our district. Our free and reduced lunch rate is around 65%. We were identified in, I think it was 2010 or 11, as a dropout factory, along with many other school districts around the nation. And since that time, we've raised our graduation rate to 85%. And it's because of the good work of a lot of you in this room, and we value our librarians like nobody's business. I've had the good opportunity, and I've been in the Northwest my entire career, and as a principal and a teacher, an English teacher, I know the value of a really good librarian and how that librarian is the heartbeat of the school. And so I hopefully maybe get to talk about a little bit more about that as we go on. But that's pretty much Tacoma School District. Thanks.
Okay, and Sean, tell us about Clayton.
Clayton's a lot smaller. We have a little under 3,000 students, 6 schools, pre-K to 12. Clayton is right outside of the city of St. Louis, and so it borders St. Louis. You could walk out one of our elementary schools and walk a few feet, and you're in the city of St. Louis. It is a community, it's a city in itself that has many businesses, banks, a lot of law firms, and so we have a lot of local taxes that come to us. We're a really high-performing school district and very proud of that. I think that what makes us high-performing is that we have a staff and faculty and librarians that have a whatever-it-takes kind of approach. And I also think that literacy is just a hallmark of what we do in our district in terms of really developing programs and curriculum that really fosters a love of reading and writing. And our librarians often are the heart of that. And like you said, we try to make our libraries the center of the school. I think the other thing too is interesting, is unique to our school. We have a conference English program at the high school, which the teachers have a reduced caseload, and so that way they can have one-on-one conferences with students. So we have a priority around literacy within our district, which I think contributes to our success.
In fact, Sean and Dave at their table were talking about what their children were reading. That was the big conversation around breakfast. But Dave, Arlington Heights, what's that like?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough and honored to be a superintendent for 20 years. My first superintendency was a small rural district, about 1,000 kids, where we were growing in enrollment, and I got to build a school. My next district was a sprawling geographical district we were hemorrhaging students, and I had to close the school. It's much more fun to build than to close, by the way. And now I'm in the suburbs of Chicago. We have 12,000 students. We're a high school-only district, and we're very stable enrollment. We have 2 majority minority schools. We have 2 pretty affluent white schools and 2 that are right in between. And we're really, really proud of the fact that everything we do, we're seeing the same results with all the different student demographics. So we're pretty proud of that work.
Okay, great. Well, we have a sense of where everybody is in the various different settings that you're in. But I want you to take a national kind of look right now. You've been listening to the conversations around librarians, I'm sure, and I wonder what your perception is of school libraries and school librarians and why they are or are not part of the national conversation. Why are they not on everybody's radar, if that's the case?
Well, I think it really comes down to what role you want to play and what the role of a specific school librarian is, right? So if you're all about the facility in which the books are housed, right, you're not part of the national conversation. If you're all about advancing literacy and the student experience within your space, you're part of the national conversation, right? So we just had I was in a school a couple weeks ago where the school was built around the library, right? That was the central hub. And the librarian would not allow students to pass through the library between classes, right? That does not send me the message that you're on my team going in the direction I want to head, right? I was in a school last year, and the librarian, the first thing she did is she came over and told me how excited she was that she went from high shelves to low shelves, and she culled all these books out of her collection. She's not part of the national conversation, right? If you're just talking about that physical space, you're not there. If we have just hired a brand new librarian who's going through the process of getting her certification to teach a dual credit AP research class, you're part of the conversation, becoming that teacher of record. If you're excited about creating lab space for students and teachers and classes to come in, and then you go back behind your desk to check out books, you're not part of the national conversation, right? How you're helping to advance literacy, providing skills and resources for teachers and kids, that's how you become part of that national conversation. So when we're having conversations, it's all about what is your value add that I know. Not that you have to explain to me, but I know because you've demonstrated that you're part of that overall vision, mission, focus. We have one goal in our district: equity, inquiry, evidence-based reading and writing. Our librarians should be part of everything we do, right? I've got 4 that are and 2 that are not, right? And so I really think it's up to you as school librarians to own the role you want to play and then get there with us. Sorry, I get a little fired up from time to time.
I think those are goals we can get behind pretty easily. Michael, did you want to add to that?
I would add, certainly in New York City and my area, my region where I supervise, it's a little different. And I say first, librarians have to be respected. All right? I think they have to be respected, have to be valued. And it happens in different areas and different locations, but I think across the board, we need to have them at the table. And there's so many missed opportunities, and when I speak to principals and I have to evaluate them, I ask them, what part of your cabinet does a librarian play? And most times, there's silence. So we have to change that. And I think having this conversation, me being a champion for school librarians is the first part. And even for me, and I take total responsibility in anything in the past where when it comes times to making decisions about budget or resources, oftentimes it's either technology or school librarians that often might have to have some cuts, right? And so how do we change that? And how do we make sure that they're at the table, they're present, and they're a part of our future? And it starts with me. And so I'm happy to say that I've been working closely with Melissa Jacobs, who's here in the audience, who's been my champion, my guider, giving me guidance, and I say that wholeheartedly because leaders today, we have to strive to be 10% better. Right? We have to strive to be better in what we do and going out of our comfort zone. And meeting Melissa and just taking a different approach have made me 10% better in everything I do as a leader. And that mindset has often now changed to supporting school librarians. So I say that to say that I'm just happy, and I thank you for everything you're doing, and that's my response.
And I know Toni wanted to, it looks like everybody wants to add to this. Yes, please.
I just want to say that I am so impressed with what I've seen the last couple days. I've been at this conference and attended the breakout sessions with you and listened to the keynotes and listened to you speak. And I think one of the ways that we become part of the national conversation, and I say we because I feel like I'm part of of you and your and it's not a movement, but it's just the awakening of what a librarian can do for a school. And so I think you are part of the national conversation because you're here and you're talking to one another and you're talking about your value and you're talking about your leadership. And I'm just so impressed with being here with you and humbled and honored to be here with you. And I have to do a shout out to my champion in my school district too, Susanna Panter, who she gives 100%, and if I can be 10% better, then I feel blessed in that regard as well. But she's been a tremendous asset, and she speaks up, and she doesn't, mince words with us, and we appreciate that about her and value that. So I just wanted to say thank you for this conference, and thank you for allowing me to come to it, and I think more of us should come and spend the time with you on a regular basis.
So the only thing I would add to that is that oftentimes I might hear people say the librarian supports the work within the classrooms or supports the literacy initiatives, and we need to change that support to lead. And the librarians are true leaders of this work. I think that sometimes what happens, what I notice, is that oftentimes our librarians are the ones who are the innovators in our school. And John Spencer wrote that in his book Empower that the definition of innovation is that you care so deeply about something that you determine to challenge the status quo and to disrupt cycles in order to have success for students. And one of the things that happens sometimes is that I see these great things happening in the libraries, and students are able to take information and determine, what is real, what is fake, and being able to look at primary sources. And what happens sometimes is I think that our librarians need to start influencing the structures of our classrooms, because then they go back to classrooms where the teacher is the purveyor of content. And and oftentimes that the skills that are taught in the library are not then carried over into the classroom. And so I think about how librarians can be co-researchers with our classroom teachers and how they have to take that leadership role to break those cycles and to think about how we can interrupt some of those things that are happening that's not going to benefit our students if we don't evolve the structures of our classrooms. So,
Sean, it sounds to me like you've actually observed this stuff in action, right? And
yeah. You mean in terms of the library?
So we're morphing into the next question, which is all about what you were just talking about. In what ways have you actually seen librarians dramatically impacting school culture? I know Toni wants to weigh in on that, probably a few of you do, but you've actually seen the use of primary sources, the development of inquiry. Inquiry is one of your values. What are those moments you see and value about culture change?
So I was very fortunate to be a principal in the school district where I serve as superintendent. I actually hired Tom Bober as the librarian in our school, and what happens is that he challenges the givens about what instruction should look like, and he changed the thought about what research looks like, and so the library is now not just for the students; it's an educational experience for the classroom teachers as well. And so I just think that having students being able to examine primary sources. I don't know if anyone went to a session yesterday. It was incredible. But being able to look at those skills and research skills that are needed for us to be able to, for students to be able to apply in different contexts and different situations.
I have had the good fortune to work with some phenomenal librarians in my career as an English teacher and a high school principal. In both cases, I've had librarians who were leaders in my building, and I think a lot of it, comes back to the building leadership and the district leadership as well. But what happens in the building is so important, and I work very closely with building principals, and a lot of what happens in the culture in the building is around what is set through the administration and the leadership in that building. And so I just, I think it boils back down to me with the term leadership from all individuals in the building and the district level, to show that leadership and to step forward. And the librarians that I've seen that have changed the culture in the building have had that leadership and the ability, given the freedom to be a leader in the building. We also are an innovative district, which means we were identified by our state school board as an innovative district. We have several small schools, high schools, and a lot of innovative programs in our district. And one of the things we also are doing is building buildings that are conducive to opening up the library as the heartbeat of the school, as I said earlier, where the walls are open. I don't know, maybe some of you wouldn't like that too well, but students, it's not an event to go to the library. The library is part of the experience all day long, and so students will walk into the library as they walk to the next class or go to the next area that they're going to lunch or leaving the building to go to some other place. They walk into the library, sit on a pillow or a sofa, and they're reading a book. Sometimes they take a book. Wow, take a book, steal a book, that's great, that's a great idea.
It's come up a few times.
and to foster that kind of feeling in the building. I've seen it change the culture as well.
But it's also digitally ubiquitous, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Michael, did you want to weigh in on that one? And then we'll do one more question, and then I think we'll open it up to your own librarians and the rest of the group. Well, actually, I think the last question is the most open. What's your advice for us? What should we be doing? Can we get a seat at the table easily?
I think you have to tell your story. I think you have to invite superintendents and board members and principals into your schools to see the cool stuff you're doing. I think you have to make sure that the focus, again, is on the student experience and the staff experience. I think that's super, super critical. And I think everybody at my level who's setting budgets and going through our visioning needs to not even think about whether our librarians are contributing to that mission, but just know as a default that you are part of that core mission of the work. But that is only going to come through us actually seeing that work. And so when we walk through schools, sometimes we walk through libraries, sometimes we don't, specifically invite us in. When you're doing something super cool, bring us in, tell your story. I agree with something Sean said earlier about a lot of times, the librarian is the backbone or the supporter. No, lead. And then as you're leading, and think through that lens of a leader, as you're thinking through that lens, then let us know about the leadership contributions you're making.
So what I would say is that I would agree with that. It's like I think librarians sometimes have to be their own PR person, and you have to be able to share the amazing things that are happening. Last year I went on did a leadership retreat, and one of the facilitators said, make sure you listen to unreasonable requests as a leader, because those are often the ones that are going to disrupt cycles and really evoke change in your schools. And so what I would say is that sometimes people are afraid to ask for those unreasonable requests. And as leaders, we need to start listening to those unreasonable requests. But as librarians, you need to be willing to take that step and ask those unreasonable requests. I think about, I had a conversation with Tom yesterday, and he was saying that, we have this role of, working with teachers, being co-researchers, co-collaborators, and, we have this expectation to really influence what's happening in the classroom, but there's no time in the schedule built for us to collaborate. It's actually just like, you just do it on, right there. And so it's like, you have to kind of insist. You have to say, this is something that is a leader of this school, I need to make sure that we have the time for this collaboration, and ask those unreasonable requests. Don't ask a lot of them, but maybe just a few of them. Like pick up one or two that are reasonable.
I'm going to needlepoint unreasonable requests, and let's also think about good trouble in our advice. So, what else do we have for advice?
I lost my train of thought. I was just
so
thinking
sorry.
That's okay. I think one of the things that I'll just mention a couple things. that I think is really important, is one of the other speakers spoke to earlier, is conversation. I think having conversations with peers in your building, talking about what you're doing. There's a great book by Meg Wheatley called Turning to One Another. And I think, sometimes, bring a book to a faculty meeting and share that with your staff, and, bring things to the table to have conversation about, because conversation will take you to the next level. And I think that one last thing I'll say is I think it's really important for you to meet as a group. I think that's why I think this is a great thing that you're doing with this conference. But I also think you don't be away from the building too much, because it's also important for you to be part of the building and part of what is going on in that building, and to participate in the work of the building, because you are a participant like everyone else in that building, and what you do is as important, if not more important, than what else is happening in the building. So I would suggest that you participate in your building as well as participate as a group across the country.
And I would just add that I think one of the most important things I find that's helpful is when school librarians are bold, really bold and passionate about the momentum they want to see and want us to understand. And I love when they reach out to me personally, fearlessly, just saying, "Hi, Superintendent Prayor, I hear you're coming to my building, would you mind stopping by?" I think that is honestly what I need, because when I get that email, I go right into that library and meet the librarian, and then I'm able to have a conversation and understand more from her or him, specifically what are the needs and what are the inequities that I need to understand. And I think the more the boldness and momentum we can gather, then I know change will come. So,
Can I offer just one other thought? If you are a white librarian, will you please run ideas past someone that's diverse before you try something super, super new and bold? So I have 2 African-American children, and I cannot tell you how offensive some of the things that my school's librarians have done that are not intentional, right? Like, don't put out a small display in February with all the books that look like my kids, right? Like, have them throughout the library, right? And during Black History Month, please do not send a letter home saying, "This is where you can find diverse books," automatically making the assumption that I don't have a diverse collection at home. Right? And so as you're thinking about the work, if you don't have a network to reach out to, find somebody in this group, because you could very unintentionally be providing some really, really racist undertones that not only affect my kids, but affect their white peers who don't even know that they shouldn't be seeing something else. And so it's so important that the role you play and what books they see when they're walking through your library, not in February, right? The other months of the year are super important, right? Sorry.
So I think what we're hearing here is a call to action. I think there's some very practical advice that's coming from our friends. I also want to mention to our friends and to other superintendents, if this gets traction beyond this room, that our new standards really address all of what you said about engagement, about inquiry. And there's a wonderful section in that talks about how to help a librarian grow. An evaluation checklist, a self-evaluation checklist. So if you're wondering, not you folks because you know this stuff, but other superintendents who don't actually have that much connection with their librarian, it's a starting point for really understanding the possibilities of how we can change whole school and whole district culture. So I just wanted to we have some of the AASL leadership here, wanted to point to Catherine and Sylvia. Excellent, thank you. So let's spread the word about that.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I think that that's really important to come back to the standards. And I think about when you're developing systems within, we have to, as leaders, thinking about even how we provide feedback to our librarians and how we evaluate our librarians. And I want to mention, we have our coordinator, Victoria Jones over here, and she helped lead, she was the voice of helping lead the evaluation process, aligning it with the standards. And we need to do that so that way our administrators know how to provide the right feedback. oftentimes we're trying to fit evaluation and feedback as if they were, the classroom teachers. So I just want to make sure that be the leader of saying that we need to change that and have the librarian's voice as part of that process. So, and I'm glad I get to recognize Victoria too, because she's here
Thanks.
representing our district as well.
Okay, now we have 5 minutes for questions. I know Casey has a question, and then I want to get to some of the librarians who are also in the representing these people. Sorry.
Here I come.
Casey Boyd.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you so much for being here. It's very obvious that you get it. You do. How all of us in here would love to multiply you across the country. Seriously. But I started thinking about this as you were talking, and I want to piggyback off of what Joyce said. There's so many superintendents and principals that leave their university core, they graduate from their universities, and they have not a clue about school libraries and the impact that they make on student achievement. Do you feel, or do you believe that maybe if university coursework would include some type of instruction, review of the AASL standards maybe, for superintendents and principals before they earn their certificate? Do you think some coursework would help? Just a question.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I don't think it makes a difference because most higher ed prep programs are not very good anyway. They're just not. There's a couple that are, but it's a lot more about learning with colleagues and from colleagues. I actually think one of the things that could be most beneficial tied into what we just said is if in addition to the standards, there's a sample template of an evaluation form. That would be incredibly helpful to get in the hands of superintendents. And we have, and maybe something you guys think about doing, like with COSIN, if you're familiar with COSIN, so they have an empowered superintendent's toolkit. So we can go right to that toolkit. It's a kind of reflection sheet for us as superintendents. And then how we do on that self-reflection, it then provides action steps to go forward. Because a lot of us superintendents were not school librarians, we need a toolkit to help us understand how best to support and collaborate and work with you. That would be my response.
I agree with that. I don't think it would hurt to have something in the universities that just as an awareness. Because I think when the conversation begins and you start to have that conversation, you realize, yeah, the librarian really did have an impact on my classroom, or the librarian really plays this part in our school. And so I just think is wherever you can put in an awareness, to put it in. I totally agree, though, that for those of us who've already been through the system, that we probably need something a little different. I still have to tell you how much I appreciate this conference. I think it's wonderful. I think you should, try to have them all over the country, so that especially for superintendents and principals. And so I think, get the word out, however you can.
I think it'd be super easy for us to make copies of that checklist, that evaluation tool, and put it in our superintendents and principals' mailboxes. I think that'd be easy. I know we have Tom had a question, I think.
Yeah, hi, Tom Bober, serve with Sean in Clayton. One thing that librarians and superintendents have in common are building principals. And I've had, I think, been lucky to serve with two types of principals, and that has been ones that allowed me to grow, and more importantly, ones that helped me grow. And I think there's a third kind that I've never served with. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, from a superintendent's perspective, how do you work with principals to move them in a direction where they are supporting librarians more? And I know that you mentioned specifically librarians being their own PR advocates, but when you're looking at specific mindsets of building principals, is there anything, special approaches that maybe you would recommend?
So what I would say is that my belief is that the principal really plays one of the most integral roles within the district, quite honestly. I think that it's the one that's leading the work within the schools, but then it's also the go-between central office. And so I think that from my perspective, it has to also, I have to make sure as the superintendent that I am fostering learning for them and investing a lot of time into their own development. I think that also then carries over into how they set the tone for their building in terms of encouraging learning or providing the space for that type of learning. I would say that is something that I don't know if districts often do as much as they should. And I think that as a superintendent, I feel like we have to really invest a lot into our principals so that way they can be better leaders of learning within the schools. So that's something that I'm truly passionate about right now. But I would kind of echo what was said earlier. It's like that development is critical. In terms of coming back to the librarians, I think that we do have a responsibility of thinking about when you're thinking about moving a school. When you're thinking about making change, principals need to make sure that the librarians are at the table. And I don't know necessarily if they're always at the table when you're thinking about change. And so that's just my thinking on that right now.
And I would just add that currently we have a concept of STEM right now. And principals love STEM. They love to just go full steam ahead with STEM. And they're omitting the fact that you need literacy, right? Students need to read. And so without the support of school librarians, without the acknowledgement of the value that they add, and if a school leader who claims to be an instructional leader stands and say that we're all about STEM, but there's no input from the school librarian, then I personally have an issue with that principal. And that's where it starts. It starts with me as a superintendent to call it out for what it is, address it for what it is, and then make a change.
Yes, we have one last question.
Good morning. I'm Robbie Reesner from Montgomery County, Maryland. And as Rebecca said earlier, this is one of the most popular things of this conference is when we can listen to superintendents from around the country. And I appreciate having the perspectives from the small, middle, and large districts. And when Mr. Prayor said that he appreciates getting emails and having people invite him into their space, and when Dr. Schuler said that we need to be on the national agenda, one of the things we always talk about at this conference is how can we do that? How do we get to your conference like we are bringing you to our conference? So what advice do you have for us to get to our national and local superintendent conferences? How do we craft our submissions so that you accept them so that we can come talk to you?
Sure. So send them to me before you submit them. I would be happy to review any of your proposals and give you ideas. I often sit on, and it's all blind selection process and judge, but if you want me to take a look at them, I mean, whatever the focus is of the conference, and they always send out that theme, like the good trouble, we have that. So put it through that lens of how you're partnering, how you're forwarding student achievement and equity through those lenses. And you want to get in really cool trouble, if you're a school that's all about STEM, man, create pathways within your library for each of the different STEM areas or fields, right? Or if you are not invited into the conversation at that principal level, force yourself in. Like, what that principal's goals are. He's or she is going to share at your faculty meetings. Come with a value add proposal for how you're going to help champion that and get on his or her calendar. Force if they're not inviting you in until, you work for Michael, which I am totally going to go apply for a job in his district because I think his leadership sounds so super cool. But if you're not invited in, force your way in by inviting yourself. No principal is going to say, I don't have time to meet with you. It might not be tomorrow, but they're not going to, well, most places at least, aren't going to say absolutely not. But I'm happy to review any submissions before you submit.
Okay, I want to thank our panelists. They've come from far and near. And I know how busy they are. They've given us some very practical ideas that we can use this week. So thank you. It's great to meet you all.
Thank you.